For those of you joining us live and the number of you joining us on the replay, thank you very much for sharing your time with us and joining us for the My Wealth video series. My name is Jeff Hunter and I'm Portfolio Manager with the Townshend, Somani and Hunter Group at Canaccord Genuity. Also on the line are our lead investment advisors, Dave Townsend and Raheem Somani. For more information about our team and the My Wealth portfolios, please check out mywealthmanager.ca. Today's call is with Nurosene CIO Daniel Gallucci and CEO Ranj. All participants have been muted, but in the chat below, feel free to direct any questions to us and we'll do our best to address them in the time permitted. Today's call will be recorded, so make sure to check your emails in the coming days for the replay information or follow our team's Facebook page at facebook.com/mywealthmanager.ca. With that, I'll hand it over to Dave Townsend.
Yes, thank you all for spending some time with us. As investment advisors and investment bankers, you're always looking for the right people with the right solution at the right time. And I hope, and I really fundamentally believe that that's where we are with these gentlemen. And it takes me, it's my great pleasure to introduce Ranj, who is president of Nurosene, who's going to shape the conversation for Dan Gallucci. Please, Mr. Bath, go ahead.
Thank you, Dave. I'm going to stay mostly silent on this call unless anyone has any specific questions. This call is specifically to introduce Daniel Gallucci, who is the founder of Nurosene, and we thought it would be a good idea for you guys to hear, directly from Daniel in terms of his years of experience and why he felt the need to create Nurosene and put something in the hands of everyone that's typically only available from people seeing a trained functional neurologist like Daniel. So Daniel and I we met last year. I came on board at the end of last year. Daniel and I immediately hit it off, and I understood what Daniel was trying to build, and then I was really kind of looking into what can I bring to the table on shaping this and taking this to the market and kind of building the business around what I thought was an incredible product. So I'm gonna hand it off to Daniel, who can introduce himself and his background. But I think just for you guys to hear firsthand of what it is that we're really building in this product is going to be super key, and why this is going to be so interesting when we deliver this to people and show them what is so powerful, especially when people are on this journey to take care of their overall brain health, which controls so many different functions. So with that, I'll pass you over to Daniel. So.
Cool. Well, thank you, Ranj, and thank you, Jeff, and Dave as well. It's truly an honor to be here. This journey started a little while back, and it's a bit, as I was speaking to Dave a bit before, it was a bit surreal, and I guess I'll go through a little bit of my own background and how we came to be at this point here, and then I guess we could, whatever you guys feel, I guess we could open it up to questions and however you guys would want to proceed. But it was a little bit of a circuitous sort of way in coming to it, where I kind of came at it through the back door, really, where initially I was a soccer player and lived overseas for a number of years playing soccer, ended up in the US, going to school at Connecticut there, and then going through sort of like the performance side of things. Was a exercise physiologist, an trained exercise scientist at first. So doing a lot of performance stuff with professional and amateur athletes. Then that kind of morphed into the world of osteopathic medicine as a blend into performance stuff. I was working with Peak Center in Ottawa, which was one of the premier sort of sport and performance providers. Numerous people, I think they're at like 50 or 60 Olympic medals over the last couple decades or so with Canadian and American athletes. Really seeing that ultimately that the brain was the ultimate controller, good and bad in terms of performance, but as well as overall health. So that led me sort of into the world of functional neurology and looking into the world of clinical neurosciences. So I was doing that, also working still in the sports medicine world with Dr. Anthony Galli in Toronto and a few other sports medicine providers. So providing really high-end quality care in the world of professional sport, and then outside of it into the world of complex neurological conditions. So I was lucky enough to basically travel all over the place, working with athletes or others in terms of either helping them perform or getting them back from injury and recovery. And it would run the gamut from children with developmental issues to being literally at the World Series. So it was anything and everything in between. And really, over the last few years, that morphed into the world of neurochemistry with a project in Minnesota with a couple doctors, Al Stein and Marty Hinz, where we were looking at playing with neurotransmitter levels in the brain to optimize people suffering from Parkinson's and Alzheimer's and other sorts of neurodegenerative issues. Then into the world of some folks that I'm eternally grateful I met out of Kingston and Queens, primarily Dr. DJ Cook, who kind of took me under his wing there on the neuroimaging and neuroradiology side. And there was a group there, Performance Phenomics, now called Voxel AI, where we were doing high-level brain imaging, things like functional MRI, DTI, CVR, just weird acronyms for very advanced types of brain imaging, but the entire time being very patient-focused. So it was about taking all that information, taking all that data, taking all that research, taking the AI, taking the machine learning, and dwindling down the 90% of it that's not useful into the 10% that actually really needs to be worked on to be able to improve performance. And really, when it came down to it, we kind of, we're so used to categorically thinking in certain ways. So there was always this sort of like stigma and everything that was attached to anything that was done sort of below the neck, and then everything above the neck was treated very differently. So behavioral sorts of disorders, mental health disorders, traumatic brain injury, post-traumatic stress disorder, anything that affected behavior had a ton of stigma attached to it. And these were sometimes in the same person. So somebody coming in on one end of a spectrum, performance, then going back and forth into the world of TBI or things like that. And the same person with the same construct in what was happening in the brain, yet being treated totally different by society, by employers, by others. And really that was the impetus for saying, okay, well, we need to do something here to be able to create and democratize these sorts of technologies, the things that we're finding in a clinical environment, the things that the research is beginning to tell us, the thing that data has been beginning to tell us, and really how do we drive that back to the population? So that's where, with a friend of mine, Graham Prohaska, more than a year ago now, that we'd kind of come up with the idea of saying, okay, well, if this is what we're trying to do, let's incorporate everything that we would in a clinical environment. So high-end neurological type care and education, the nutraceutical side in terms of supplementation, where we'd been compounding things like that over the last decade or so, and lucky enough to have the things that sport has been amazingly helpful for: blood work, food sensitivities, genetics panels, like all the things at your disposal that were sort of like a proving ground or a stomping ground for some of the stuff that we were developing. And then really the back end, which was, to get into something as complex as the brain. And this is, we were talking to Jeff before, if anybody's kind of said they figured it out, you've almost got to run for the hills, because we've got 86 billion neurons in there connected to anywhere between 1,000 and 10,000 others. And we're only now starting to peer into the brain at levels of resolution that's even going to give us the beginning inklings of what's really happening at the brain. So that's where the high level analysis from the data and machine learning over the years has been critically important and will be moving forward. So really, it just came back to understanding it at the end of all that. The two most important things I would say was that you couldn't really separate the brain and body, and they needed to be sort of treated as one when you were moving forward. And that was regardless of if it was somebody suffering from anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, TBI, Parkinson's. It really didn't matter. The variables changed, obviously, but the underlying theory didn't. And the other one was that brain really does create your mind. And we've known this as far back as the 50s and 60s, when they used to split people's brains in halves when they were suffering from seizure disorders. And it's still something that we see today. So really, that's really where we've become, and that's really where we're focusing in terms of, I think the industry and the space is great right now because everybody is super health aware. And I think that's phenomenal because we've got wearables and we've got all these things. And I saw something the other day from the World Economic Forum saying that there was going to be 50 billion connected devices in the next 10 years or so, which is amazing, but that also means that there's a lot of noise. So we have to be able to decipher sort of the noise from the signal to be able to provide what's actually needed there. And yeah, and I think sort of you need a sort of integrated way to be able to do it. So we're coming at it from a little bit of a changing paradigm where we're using high level analysis. We're using sort of like the stuff that we configure on the back end, because as we're on these things literally 2,000 to 3,000 times a day, there's a lot of a digital footprint that sort of gets left behind that we can figure out on the back end. And from that, we can eventually, you know, right now we're just providing strategies that say, okay, listen, we can take this information and provide some useful stuff back to you. Where I think it becomes critically important is at some point, do we get to be preemptive? So when we start to see that things are starting to go awry, do we start to see when we get to be able to get at problems before they really get at us? And that's what's super exciting about moving forward, is eventually getting into the prognostic or the early indication side of all these sorts of issues. So yeah, I apologize. That was probably too long, too winded of a conversation there, but that's kind of where we've got to. And then if you guys want, we can go into some of the specifics on the programming or the supplements or whatever the case may be, but I'll take your guys' lead on that.
Daniel, I guess something that I'd like you to expand upon is, what's your ultimate goal? Where do you think that this goes, and how do you take it there?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I would love to come at it with a certain level of absolute certainty, but instead of certainty, I'll try and come at it with a bit of clarity, because I think certainty sometimes doesn't give us the flexibility that we need to adapt and change along the way. So from a clarity perspective, what I would love to be able to do is say, or what we need to be able to do, and we will do it, is what we'll do is we'll say, okay, regardless of where you're at in your life right now, we can provide you with some strategy, because very few people are actually doing it. When you look at sort of this multifaceted, interdisciplinary way of looking at performance or dysfunction or behavior or whatever the case may be, you know, when you really look at it, very few people are actually implementing the things that can be done, that you can sort of take responsibility for yourself in terms of kind of moving the needle from where you are to where you need to be. And even if those are small steps, you know, through the app, through some of the stuff that's being done, that ultimately those small steps are self-reaffirming enough over time that they can kind of take you in the right direction. So that's one point of it. It's providing people right now with useful, practical strategies to be able to say, okay, are you doing these sorts of things here? Are you doing these sorts of things? Or how can we help you with this and that? We can get into the specifics of that. But more importantly, I think, you know, when you look at the billion or so people that are suffering from behavioral disorders, when you look at the now rates of inflammation in youth moving forward, you look at the CDC that said that 50% of youth under the age of 18 have been diagnosed with a chronic inflammatory condition. I think that's really where we have to go, is be able to say, okay, there's been some things here over the last few years that have gotten a little bit broken in the food system, in the way that we, you know, whether it's we sit all day, whether it's how we're working, whether it's how we're sleeping, but on multiple levels. And it's not just one of those things, but that we need to be able to intervene earlier to be able to identify when this sort of dysfunction occurs. So when somebody begins, they don't have an anxiety attack, but in the 3 weeks leading up, they've gone 10 out of 12 days with less than 6 hours of sleep. Or when somebody hasn't necessarily been moving for any period of time. Or when you look at the cases, and you know, I'll tread lightly in these sorts of issues, but one of the examples is, you know, in the world of depression, when you're looking at biometric data on the back end, just something that I thought was super interesting, that was new to me, was, you know, when they were going through cycles of depressive episodes, when people kind of coming, we often always think, okay, when people are massively depressed or they're suffering from a major depressive disorder, they're actually not moving around. And because they're not moving around and they're not interacting with other people, that's when they're at the highest level of suicide. That's when they're at their greatest sort of suicide risk. And some of this interesting digital data emerging over the last few years is like, it's actually the opposite. It's when they've gone through that and they're starting to climb back out of it. So you're actually starting to see them move again. You're actually starting to see them interact again. You're actually starting to see them do certain things. And then something triggers an event. And then that's when you see, in this case, like suicide rates. So that's where I think it becomes super interesting, is when you start to say, how can we look at this integration between technology and humans? We have to understand that at some level that it exists and it is only going to continue moving into the future. And how do we best prepare people for that? So give them the tools today, as well as be able to intervene earlier for those folks that'll need it tomorrow.
So how do you accomplish this? What does the app, where is the app going? What's it designed to do?
Okay. I think for right now, there'll be various versions of the app, but for right now, the first version that will be released in the next couple of weeks or so is almost ready to go. It'll be interesting in terms of, it'll be basically teaching what we have this 4x4 model of behavior or model of performance that we've used, which is again, what we've used and been somewhat successful with over the last decade or so in clinic, where we're basically saying, okay, we're going to take 4 sort of interventional strategies here, one being exercise, one being brain stuff, one being nutrition, one being sort of recovery regen. And we're going to combine those with 4 different areas of the brain and body, like your new brain, your old brain, your spinal cord, and out at the periphery, your arms and legs and all that sort of stuff. So basically what we're going to be able to do is we're going to be able to provide people some very basic information to say, okay, like to be able to improve your health, to be able to improve your well-being, we have this very integrated brain and body approach to be able to provide you with tools to be able to do that. And most times for most people, they may be doing one thing or a couple other things, but they're usually not doing all of them. And the reality of it is everybody needs to do different things. So we can do a little bit of analysis on the back end that says, okay, this is what you're doing. This is what you need to be doing, and we'll fill in the gaps for you. So we can work adjunctively to people's, sorts of like whether they're doing certain things. Well, I'm on Peloton every morning, or I'm doing CrossFit, or I'm doing this, or I'm doing that. We can kind of not seamlessly, but we can integrate ourselves into a way where we can provide strategies to be able to help them with what they're doing right there. The important thing, and not that that's not important, that's nice and it's helpful, but the really, what really sort of drives our motivation and my motivation forward is already what's kind of already in the works for version 2 moving forward, which is the data analysis side. So it's understanding, when I've been on this thing for a week, what is my own behavior like? What is my baseline? So how is it that I am moving? How much am I moving? How much am I not? How do I literally touch, the screen when I'm sending messages to to my wife or whatever the case may be? So you start to get almost like this little digital footprint of people and how they behave. And we can do it in a very content-free way. So we don't need to see what you're writing or things along those lines, but everything from eye movements to gyroscope, which is telling you how you move. We know these things are critical to be able to intervene early in health and disease. So one example would be something called saccades, which is basically the eyes jumping back and forth. And you can watch that on a screen. You can look at those movements and you can use those as early indicators for certain types of dysfunction. So those are the things that are super fascinating in terms of kind of on the back end for V2 moving forward, is like not just giving people information, which will be in V1. It's like, how are we collecting information so that we can act to be able to provide them stuff specific to them. So that's what we're going to be doing on the app. And it's everything from exercise stuff to quote unquote brain training stuff. And, the interesting thing I think is, again, when it comes to kind of the world of healthcare right now, where and wellness and mental wellness and all these sorts of things, it's like, everybody's focused on the behavior. So it's like, LeBron's gonna, which is fine, it's great. It's like LeBron's gonna tell you to meditate, so you'll go and meditate, or you need to do this, or you need to do yoga, and you need to do all these things. But the focus is really on the behavior without understanding the underlying construct of what's happening in the brain. And what we're doing through the app is to say, through the questions that we're asking you, through the information that we're trying to gather back and forth, what we're trying to really do is intervene with your brain. And, we kind of, Ranj will be like yelling at me after this call, but it's like, when we're kind of saying that I'm coming at it from the perspective where I care less about your behavior and I care more about the biology of what's happening at your brain level. Because that is something that we've seen throughout evolution. That is something that's relatively similar across species. And usually what happens when we go into the very clinical environments of being able to help people, when you can put a person in the scanner and you can have decent levels of blood flow to areas of the brain, when you can have decent levels of glucose utilization at various levels of the brain, and you can have nice sort of activations of networks in the brain, that brain is going to be super healthy. And we see that unequivocally across the board. So it really comes back to teaching all that stuff back to people in a way that becomes super helpful for them and super personalized as we move forward. Because as we said, it's like everybody's going to require a little bit of a different approach, and it's their data that's going to be able to help drive that moving forward. It's a lot of stuff.
So if I understand, Daniel, you're going to interact with the app. You're going to hold your phone, and the phone is going to watch you and basically collect your data, right? And you're looking at your 4 pillars, like how does this work? How is it relative to the average person? Why is this such a new, I look at this and I go, I've never seen, like, is this a new, the question is it the new paradigm in where mental health, you're going to address the mind and the body, versus rather than treating, the symptoms?
It's a wonderful, Dave, it's a wonderful question, because I think when you look at it's really what, without trying to get too nerdy with it, the last 150 years or so of behavior, what have we done? We've looked at primarily animal models, and you've put them in certain conditions, and we've extrapolated from there and said, okay, well, this is what it means for human health and behavior. So this sort of experimental model was really, but it was really all we had, other than just being able to do things at a very small level. And that shaped a lot of the sort of scientific studies that you still see today, in the randomized controlled trials that you still see today. And that's great, because there's still a part of that's useful, but that doesn't mean anything to the person I can promise you, that means nothing to the person that's showing up in clinic that has a multitude of things because they're worrying about their financial situation, and they got to get the kids to school, and they've got a job, and then, throw COVID on top, which is then a whole other story. And the multitude of variables that exist right now, the only way you're going to be able to weed through that is through what we'd call real world evidence. So this is interacting with technology in a way that says, okay, what are the factors that are really driving this person nuts right now? What are the factors that are not allowing this person to be optimal right now, or sending this person down a road that maybe isn't so helpful right now? And it's all these different factors combined. So you need to look at, the very sort of Maslow's basic hierarchy, everything from, the situation that they're in, just from a security and food security and a housing security standpoint, to the environment that they're interacting with, is going to be hugely influential. So while those little randomized controlled trials and the observational data, when we look at massive bits of the population, they can be helpful, I can promise you in a individual clinical setting, it means almost nothing. So how do you gather data that's useful? How do you gather individual data? And really it comes back to, and this has been the most frustrating part for me, is that sometimes I can't help as much as I would like in a clinical environment, because I don't have, or until like the last couple of years, I didn't have the high level analysis needed to be able to take all this data in, to be able to break it down, to be able to turn that into like, okay, well, now this is what we need to do moving forward. So, you know, really when you look at where we need to go moving forward, it's being able to look at this sort of symbiosis between humans and technology, to be able to extract high-level analysis from these interactions and then be able to move forward. And some of it you can even grab from not. So for example, you know, even if in a very rudimentary way, Dave, if I didn't know your, you know, let's say you weren't. So let's say it's somebody that not everybody has access to a Whoop band. Nobody cares to wear an Aura ring and all these sorts of connected devices. But the reality of it is, even if I see, you know, I can't do it to the same level of specificity, but if I see you put your phone down at 11 p.m., but you pick it back up at 2 a.m. and you pick it back up at 5 a.m., like I can still infer a certain level of what's happening at the brain when that's happening, or I can still infer a certain level of what's happening with stress hormones in your system and how that would affect you over time. So, you know, yes, the more we get, the better we can sort of interact with people moving forward. But even without that, when it comes to just democratizing this sort of health aware universe that we're living in right now, it comes back to the basics. We need people to move more. You know, we need people to be able to activate, there's a few, you know, there's some brain training apps and things out there, so you could do puzzles and things, and that can be helpful. But the reality of it is, again, it's like you have 86 billion neurons and only less than 20% of them are your new modern cortical brain. So you have 80% of your brain that is just like the brain of a primate and just like the brain of another species, and most of it just like the brain of a shrimp. So really it comes down to, like, you know, we're in stress month right now. It's like stress awareness month is April. It's like understanding, where does that come from? And you're like, oh, well, complex organisms had this response 600 million years ago. And that becomes important, because then you can understand, well, what kind of, how did that stress response evolve? And where are the little windows that we can take advantage of? Because without that sort of stress response, we wouldn't be here right now. So we think of stress as this terribly bad thing that's going to create all this trauma and despair. And it's true when it gets out of control and the way that it's implemented in society today. But we've got to sort of look back at it and say, listen, this is also an amazing opportunity to act. This is also an amazing opportunity to sort of understand that there's ways that we can look at this system here. So yeah, I think it's really a matter of factoring all those sorts of things into the equation in a very dynamic way. So you need the data, and smart computer people much smarter on the back end than me to be able to sort of look at that sort of variability into planning into the equation as well, because again, nothing in biology is static.
Can you touch on your, I want to call them braintraceuticals, not nutraceuticals, but, you know, as a whole approach, right? You have to have, you know, you're talking about reaching cellular, at the cellular level. How do you create cellular health?
Yeah, so this would be a good point in saying, yeah, where it's almost like, and this is where it comes a bit different, and I apologize, but we can kind of go through it if anybody wants, where it's almost like the anti-brain health supplement, where again, from a foundational perspective, the brain stuff develops kind of later developmentally. So there's all this other stuff that's happening first from a cellular perspective. So with the first two products that we have, Drive and Restore, it really comes down to that sort of like, fundamentally, forget about the nootropics, forget about the thing that's going to target this receptor and all those other sorts of things. It's like, no. From the foundation of what happens in biology, how do we interact there? So what easy example that I sometimes will give people, it's like analogous to, to building a house, really, where it's very typical, and which is good. In some cases you need, it's like, it's very typical right now to say, okay, well, antioxidants are amazing for my immune system, so I just need to throw antioxidants into the equation. And that makes sense, and they can have some effect. But if you look at the underlying biology, it's like the antioxidants are like the framing that you're putting up and the shingles that you're sort of putting up on the house, whereas the foundation, which is where you really want strength in terms of building your house, is a process that's happening way before you're making antioxidants. So there's, again, we don't have to get super sciencey with it, but at the foundation, there's this interaction that we're very fascinated with, which is nitric oxide, which kind of stays inert. You can be 80, 90 years of age, and it kind of just floats around your system, being totally inactive, doing its thing as a little bit of a dilator, so it opens stuff up. And then all of a sudden it meets with something else called superoxide, and then it forms peroxynitrate. And peroxynitrate, we can all Google it later, peroxynitrate is disastrous from an overall physical and mental health standpoint. But it's so rarely talked about as the foundational aspect of what's creating these cells to go down a road of, like, you know, where they're not functioning properly, which then leads to the behavior. Again, we get so focused on the behavioral side and say, okay, well, how do we fix the behavior? Where, again, we're trying to come at it from the opposite, which is like, how do I put the cells? We've been around, again, whether we want to split it categorically into humans, non-humans, pre-humans, or whatever the case may be, but we've been around for a long time, and success leaves clues. So how do we get into those clues to be able to move forward? So one of the things that we're really focused on at the beginning is saying, okay, how do we improve the foundational stuff? And then some of it, which also does have an impact on the brain, because a lot of that foundational stuff goes up through the blood-brain barrier and can act there. And then how do we then target some of those other sorts of things later?
It's very interesting stuff. I'd like to ask Ranj to comment on how the company moves forward here and how you intend to commercialize the products, and what's the rollout plan. If you could just briefly comment on that. Thank you very much, Dan.
You know, thanks, Dan. So you know, as you heard, you know, we're launching an app into market. We'll actually be launching our app into market next week. And you know, as you heard from Dan, the version 1 is to get people very much, you know, comfortable with the exercises, and our version 2, which Dan was alluding to, starts introducing all these different data collection points, passive data collection points, that we call them, integrating like the eye tracking, the gyroscope. We're going to be integrating with various wearables, Apple Health, Google Fit. That's not too far away. So that's going to be coming in version 2 in a few months. So we're probably about 2 to 3 months max where that will all be integrated. And that's the beginning of where we take this thing. So you know, we're going to start building in you know, back-end kind of analytics and progress dashboards that people will be able to track their progress. But then we start using machine learning and AI to start giving some level of predictability against, you know, future healthcare conditions like Parkinson's, like Alzheimer's, and other things that people will be concerned about, you know, when it comes to the brain. And we start building in like a preventative plan inside the app, so that, you know, eventually you know, each person's program will be very individualized based on the things that they might be facing around the way that they're interacting with the app, the history that they've delivered through the intake form, and then other touch points, as I mentioned, as we're collecting data and integrating, even right down to genetics data, with eventually integrations with things like 23andMe. So so where do we go with this in terms of revenue? We're already beginning to look into various ways that we can almost like have, you know, subsets of groups of people that would want even deeper levels of analytics. So we're investigating what we're calling a Neuro Pro version of this, and there's different lanes of where we can take this. On one side, it could be on the developmental side. So any parent concerned with, you know, how their kids' brains are developing as they go through just, you know, usual education, or playing school sports, and then seeing how that might be impacting them. That would require a deeper level of analytics. Right down to also teams and people kind of like managing school sports, how they would like to see holistically how the teams are all kind of like faring together. There's also opportunities to start thinking about this in a kind of like the wellness warrior kind of person who's been on that health track where they're taking care of their physical fitness and nutrition, now turning their attention towards mental wellness, and is interested to integrate that into their overall lifestyle or track on a different level. So we're investigating lots of different opportunities from the app side of where we take this. We can take this beyond that. General, corporate wellness programs, educational programs, whole bunch of like different subsets of people that might be concerned with various healthcare conditions that might want to track on this level. And so there's a whole bunch of ways that we can start thinking about taking the app and looking into different revenue opportunities around the app. Dan talked about some of the products that we're launching into market. We'll have 5 products coming into the market in the next couple of months. Our e-commerce store actually goes up this week, and our products are being manufactured as we speak, and shipping the first few products over to the States in the next probably 2 weeks, and will be available for sale. We're already looking into other SKUs of products that stay in our lane of overall brain health. Our mission statement is really to provide individuals with the solutions to empower them to take control of their own mental health or brain health. And we'll be looking at other products that will complement that offering. So you may see other products coming into market this year as well, which also additional revenue drivers. So that's kind of the core for this year of like what we're building. And on the future side, we'll be looking into like I said, with the overall mission statement of looking at solutions. So that could take us into different areas. We'll be doing R&D into looking into new solutions for mental health care. Some of those could be productized. Like some of those could be more focused around specific compounds. Some of those could be technologies. So we're kind of open in terms of where we look at solutions for overall mental health, and how that kind of plays into the overall mission statement of Nurosene.
Very interesting. After we talked last week with you, Ranj, there was a company called Ginger.
Yeah.
Ginger, it made a big splash. I don't know. Is it a comp? Is it competition, or what do they do that they were able to attract $100 million investment from BlackRock?
So
startling numbers. Startling.
Yeah. So big numbers, and obviously pandemics accelerated the need for a lot of people to think about their general mental wellness. So over the last couple of years, we've seen the rise in a lot of these. I'd categorize Ginger as in the telehealth space. A lot of telehealth solutions to make counseling more accessible to a lot of people, and Ginger's done a great job, particularly in the corporate space as well. Making sure that as corporates becoming more attuned to making sure that they're offering solutions to their workers. Ginger's been one that's come across and done a great job, and integrating with a lot of corporate wellness programs. So it's different, and I'm actually wanting to stay away from the telehealth space just because it's becoming very noisy and busy, and some great companies in there already. We're not telehealth, and we won't be. And this is very, very different. This is predictive healthcare. This is preventative. This is a whole new lane of like understanding why it's so important for us to integrate what we call radically fundamental habits that each of us should be doing on a daily basis, just to take care of your brain. In the same way we've realized the importance of getting up and stretching in the morning, or leading a balanced diet. These are things that your brain's controlling so many different functions in your body, and there's an education that needs to be done of like it's important, but this is why it's important. This is why that we're asking you to do these things, because you could be predisposed to certain things, or you just need to be feeling healthier because your brain's controlling these functions, but you can tune it to a certain point as well. So we're really coming at it from a very different angle, and we have such a big differentiator from all the telehealth solutions that are out there.
And if I could just throw one thing in there on that side, because Ranj is exactly right. I think, and some of those platforms are amazing. And I think there's a portion of that focus that definitely needs to be there in terms of like from coming at it from a more cognitive behavioral aspect of weeding in through the nuance of behavior. And as Ranj said, there's a few in the space that are doing that, and they seem to be doing a good job. I think still the underlying premise from where we're coming at it is that behavior, like it or not, is 1000% contextual. So it's based on the context of what's happening at this moment, but also what was happening earlier in the day, what could have been happening weeks before. But then you really look at it, when you look at what's happening at the brain level, it's dependent on what was happening throughout development. So we see that in twin studies, you see that in developmental studies, even in utero. So when you look at and this is where looking at COVID right now, where it poses such a threat moving forward, something that we need to look at. It's like, we know that, for example, women that are carrying in the first and second trimester that are under a certain level of stress, that actually shapes the size of the fetus's amygdala in terms of how developed or not it'll be when that fetus ends up being 20 to 25 years old. So all these things, and then that kid at 25 goes and assaults somebody or pulls a trigger or whatever the case may be, and we want to look at what's happened at that moment and not realize that everything up until there could have put them in that position. So how do we let the behavioral people deal with the behavioral side, which is great, but how do we work with the underlying neurobiology of the brain? How do we target the brain? How do we ensure that there's blood flow when maybe that people were under a certain scenario where you could have a restriction in size of certain parts of the brain, or these things that now science is beginning to show us, but that gap between providing some strategies, which oftentimes are not very difficult. Having done some studies with the Canadian military and looking at things like post-traumatic stress disorder and things like that, a lot of this stuff is stuff that's been there for a very long time. And it's hard to weed through, and they need to do it. But what you can also do is help them target the brain in a certain way so that you can give them better resources for the stuff that they need to do moving forward. And that's where a lot of our focus will be.
I think just to finish up, I think it's a great verification as well. There's, again, coming back to pandemic, it's made a lot of people start thinking about, starting to take care of their mental wellness. It's important. Mental health isn't a dirty word like, people thought it was. It doesn't necessarily mean you're suffering with mental health conditions. It just means that you need to take care of that thing that's sitting on top of your head. And all these companies that are getting large valuations. You've got Ginger raised what, 50 million last year and 100 million just recently, and then you got the Headspace and the Calms of the world. People are beginning to integrate this thing into their life, so it's paving the way for companies like us. I think now showing that people are wanting to take care of this. People are wanting this understanding. So the timing for us is actually fantastic. There's a lot of people taking notice right now.
It's all it's overwhelming. The idea that predictive healthcare, as much as everybody it's very easy to say, but this is a path. You're down this path really as I get deeper into listening to the story, basically as it unfolds. This is really a predictive healthcare story, as much as it is anything, helping people understand where they are and avoiding where they could go.
Yeah, and it's a great point, because Ranj knows this. There's maybe even a couple people on the call that knows this. Having been in sport, we've had a couple occasions where people have reached out and been like, "Hey, Danny, I'm really struggling with something here," and one case in particular, and I would really love to be able to come in. This is on a Thursday, and then I'm with another person on Sunday morning, and we get a message that this person has now committed suicide. And you're like, it's just very real. It's just like, is there anything that you could have seen before? And we don't know, but this is why you have to kind of figure this out. It's like, what are the chances? Yeah, it's just, it just becomes very real in terms of looking at these things in a very multidimensional way. And again, the healthcare professionals that are looking at it from a purely cognitive aspect, they have to, because just the simple ability to be able to relate to somebody and connect with somebody is huge. But this again brings up the greater point of even just the pandemic and what it's done to socially disconnect us. We sometimes have a very reductionist, very myopic view on what health is, and we sort of, you know, you lose the forest for the trees, and oftentimes it's really about bringing all that together, and it's very complex, it's very dynamic, but really it requires a more systems-based approach, because that's just how stuff works in biology. And I always go back to biology, but that's basically us. So yeah, it's like we have to do it that way.
Very good. So in the interest of time, we've had 45 minutes. Personally, I could ask a lot of questions, but I'm not going to. I'm going to ask Ranj to sort of wrap up. Daniel, it's just such a pleasure.
Thank you, guys.
You know, your life's work here now. It's funny that it can now actually happen because computers allow to crush this monstrous amount of data, which, you know, was never at the hands of people such as you before. So your time is really, you know, the timing, not just of everything, but the idea that you now have the tools to
100%.
really understand this massive amounts of data is, you know, here we are. So Ranj, if you'd just like to wrap up, or Daniel, if you've got anything to say in closing, and then we'll go to Ranj.
No, I think Ranj can do it. I'll just say one thing, just that again, there's an amazing sort of property that emerges from the brain, which is our mind, and yeah, our ability to kind of journey into that is going to be an exciting one. So I'm looking forward to, and you guys supporting that has been amazing, and I'm just excited to continue to do so.
Thanks,
Thank
Daniel.
you. Our pleasure. Ranj?
Yes. So thanks, Dave. So we're actually like super excited to build this product and put this in the hands of people. You know, every one of us here at Nurosene has a passion. You know, you can hear it from Daniel of what he built with Nurosene, and wanting to put that in the hands of people, to, you know, give them the power to take control of their overall like mental wellness journey. So, you know, we're super excited. The people that we're getting involved, from, you know, very senior people in the scientific and medical communities. You can read about some of the backgrounds on our website of some of the people who are really excited that, you know, we're building this, and they're saying it's very timely. So, you know, excited to, you know, announce this to the world. You're going to hear some big announcements coming out from the company, from you know, what we're building, some of the other people that we're getting involved in the company, and you'll hear that all across like major print publications, some television appearances. So, and, you know, some of, like I said, some of the associations of organizations and individuals that are getting involved. So I think, you know, it's nice to see that it's verified from everyone we talk to. It's like, we need this now. We'd love to be involved. We'd love to give you our time. And, you know, I think, you know, to get this into market and get people to play around with it, use it, give us feedback, and we'll grow from there. So our version 1 is just the beginning of where we take this. So you can already see, you know, what we're building has many different opportunities. So, you know, excited to launch this, and I thank you for all listening in on the call, and reach out if you have any other questions.
In the interest of, thank you very much, Ranj, and thank you, Daniel. In the interest of time here now, there's some questions that are unanswered. For those of you that have asked questions, we'll pose them to management and get answers back to you. But first and foremost, from my partners and myself and Canaccord, we're just so happy to be involved in you know, with these gentlemen, and to start this journey that may end up, and we hope ends up, in a very, very interesting place. So again, thank you all very much for attending. Thank you for presenting, Daniel and Dan.
Thank you.
And at this point, we'll leave it. And those that have questions, we'll get them answered and come back to you. Again, thank you all. Have a nice day.
Thanks, guys.